Y'all, we finally have some news on the upcoming shadow spell changes, and they're nuts. I made a video 2 days ago talking about this, but since then, in the test realm Discord server, the one where Wizard101 devs literally talk openly with the community, they dropped a lot of details on what's happening to shads. And this is massive, so we gotta dive right into it, right? There are 3 major parts of this announcement. The 3 changes are as follows, right? 1, every shadow enhanced spell, instead of being worth whatever it's worth plus 1 shadow pip, it's going to be worth whatever it's worth plus 2 shadow pips. Considering that this announcement isn't accompanied by any changes to the actual like damage or overall utility of the spell, the conclusion is that a shadow pip, which is now right now in design worth like 5 to 6 pips, is going to be worth closer to 3 pips. And that makes sense, right? Even if you get a shad, if you can't use it on a spell like this until you get a second one, it is halved in value. The second big part of this upcoming update is that it will not affect standard combat, meaning anything outside of raids, PvP, and the few advanced combat sigils that they've added will not be affected by this change. And finally, this will be accompanied by a PvP ban on burst heals that are mid to high pips like Satyr in the main deck. Now, there's a lot to unpack here, so let's dive right into it. I think I wanted to start this video by talking actually about the second point, which is the fact that this is only going to affect advanced combat, not standard. And I think this is a really, really important, you know, thing to like keep in mind, because I know that a lot of people have this mentality, and this is just, I don't blame people. I'm just trying to say how I view it. But people have this mentality that PvP changes are affecting the scope of the entire game. And I don't know how else to say this, but that simply isn't true anymore. If anything, there is a real effort from the devs, it seems, to make advanced combat more and more of a thing. They're trying to curate PvP, sigils with rule sets and raids into something that actually is difficult and something that is balanced. And it also seems like because they're making sure that, you know, like, you know, there is still like, you know, a no PvP or, you know, no advanced combat set, like, you know, way of playing the game that's very casual, because they're still making sure that standard combat, right, all of your normal PvE is not affected by this. There should be no reason to worry that PvP is affecting how the rest of the game is played. That's a big TLDR. As far as how they're gonna achieve this, it seems like they're much like, you know, a lot of the ways, you know, no PvP and PvP spells work at the moment. They will divide PvP and PvE versions of spells with spell limit. Now, I don't think that they're gonna actually have like a source to drop spell limit. So what I believe is going to happen is that the main version of the spell is going to be no PvP, and then everyone who wants to PvP with it will be able to buy just like 1 or 2 spell limits very quickly and make it into the version that they can use in PvP, the 2 shadow pip version. Now, obviously, buying spellments just to PvP and then having a version of it that's no PvP, it's a band-aid solution, and I'm sure they're aware of this. So I feel like this is going to be like a weird little middle ground for PvP players until they figure out how they're really going to phase out these spellaments for shadow spells. They're actually inconveniencing PvP players in some ways to actually make the PvE experience completely untouched by this change. So before people jump to the conclusion that PvP is ruining the rest of the game, it is very much not the case, and very little is changing for most people that use shads outside of PvP and raid. Now, let's talk about how the value of the shadow pip is about to change. Right now, every 5 to 6 rounds, you gain a pip that gives you 6 other pips of value. I didn't know that a shadow pip was worth 6 pips. I wasn't aware of this until recently. I thought it was like 3 to 4, but that is gigantic. And considering that shads have literally dictated how PvP is going, and every other gambit, every other utility, honestly, every high pip spell, if you really think about it, anything of that nature just has not been in use. PvP is going to be vastly different if you have to literally wait for 2 shads to use a shadow enhanced spell. I think things like setting up gambits is going to be more common. I think Shrike is actually going to be more used with higher pip spells. There's going to be more cycling and not just playing around 1 or 2 shadow pip spells. And gear that gives shads that can only be accessed by packs is not going to matter as much. So the meta is going to be less pay to win. This is all to say not that PvP will be better, but it will be very different. Maybe better, maybe worse. We'll need to see. I think potentially the most surprising element of what we've been told about this upcoming update is a ban on burst heals. Now, for people that are unfamiliar with the term burst heals, I've used the term direct heals when talking about this, but essentially a burst heal is a heal like Satyr, while, you know, a non-burst heal would be a heal like that's an overtime, basically, like Wings of Fate or Hungry Caterpillar, even Regenerate. And they're going to be main deck PvP banning spells like Satyr, and I can only assume Dryad. These seem to be the burst heals that would make a lower, rate of damage from having to use 2 Shadow Pips on spells. These are the spells that would be OP in that scenario. Now, keep in mind, I still think healing is going to be OP, right? If it takes someone 5 pips and 2 shads to do the same amount of damage a regenerate can heal off, that is kind of weird. I'm gonna be honest. I feel like life with even just overtime heals will be very powerful. The only good news is there are spells that counter overtime heals very, very directly, especially when they're protected, like Regenerate. And overtime heals that aren't protected can be stolen by ice and by people that use Gearhead. So basically, overtime heals, yes, they're still going to be very, very powerful, and they'll have the power to cancel out entire shadow hits, and you have to wait longer to get these shadow hits, to be usable, right? All of that's still true, but these overtime heals are liabilities that can be countered by other spells. I'm gonna keep it a buck. I think stalling strategies are still gonna be a thing. I just think they're gonna be a little less good if your entire goal was just to keep healing and not hit with those heals. And I think I might have a super unpopular opinion on this, but I just wanted to weigh in on the whole healing debate on this. They're nerfing healing very obviously because it can be used to stall out games where shads aren't as accessible. But that approach just does not fix the reason why healing is stupid, and that's because the actual base heals of these spells is either too high, or the actual outgoing that we now have access to as life wizards or any healing school is too high. Considering that you can put 2 mending pins on your main gear and basically have a minimum of 60 outgoing, and that's before you even consider, literally, rings that give outgoing, thames that give outgoing, pets that give outgoing talents. I think outgoing is simply either too high, or the healing per pip that's afforded spells like Satyr is way too high. I think overhealing should run into the same pitfalls as something like over weaknessing or over shielding. Have you ever seen someone shield a bunch of times when you cast an overtime on them because they don't want to get hit by whatever you're threatening? But every time they shield with an OT on, you can use that to get more tempo, right? You can maybe cast a damage, or you can cast a blade, you can change the bubble. Healing doesn't seem to suffer that same pitfall because it doesn't just lose you offensive tempo, it erases how the game has been going up to that point. So I think banning Dryad and Satyr from PvP, yes, it will be an ends to a means, but I don't think it's the right one. I think they do need to have a much bigger look, and I assume this will happen, a much deeper look into healing. This is very much all to say that for people that are doing advanced combat, like raids, or if you're interested in the sigils that are happening, or if you're interested in PvP, I think we're gonna have to, basically experience somewhat of a temporary band-aid fix to this whole issue, and honestly, I don't know if I'm excited or nervous. PvP is going to be mad different. However, I will say this, it might actually be a lot better depending on how the meta shifts. If it is worse, we'll have a lot of reasons to point at. So hopefully, wherever the meta goes, it's something that we can all learn from and we can make a better meta out of it. But just making sure I drive that point home, if you're a PvE player, this really should not affect you almost whatsoever. If you're a raider, maybe if you use burst heals a lot, it might affect you. And if you're a PvP player, you might have to find access to other sources of damage, including things like gambits, things like lore spells, things like, your higher pipettes. Weaknessing, shielding, auraing, and bubbling, and playing around a shad for the entire game is probably no longer going to be that viable of a strategy. Guys, let me know what you think of the upcoming shad changes, especially if you're a PvP or someone who does advanced combat, but also if you do PvE. What do you guys think of these changes? Is this something that we've needed for years because people have had a problem with shads for years? Or does this feel very abrupt, and how would you make it feel less abrupt? Then there's a lot to talk about on this video, so I look forward to reading all the comments. Drop a like if you enjoyed, leave us up a review, and if somebody hasn't told you you're awesome today, they doing something wrong. Stay awesome, y'all. See y'all soon, and yeah.